Nawal, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, this is my first time meeting a Muslim hijabi actor, so it's an honor to meet you.
Thank you. Oh my God, I don't deserve that honor. Oh my God.
So what is it like? What is it like being a Muslim actor, a hijabi Muslim, a Muslim woman wearing a hijab?
Oh wow, what a good question. So it has its good days and then it has its kind of bad days. Usually it tends to be very awkward in certain spaces. When I'm in acting classes, I'm always really kind of self-conscious about the fact that I'm really different. I'm always kind of curious as to how much more trained everyone else is and how I'm just trying my best to learn in any way that I can. But alternatively, it's really, it's nice to have conversations with people about my career, about my dreams, and just hearing people say, oh, that's really cool, I've always wanted to do that. And just hearing people say like, oh, so how do you get into that? Because there's no resources for us, and especially as Muslim women, to kind of do this kind of work. Like, I don't have a brother or a cousin or like a cool rebel person friend that I know that I can ask. And so it's nice when people kind of come up to me and be like, so how do you do it? And I'm like, oh my God, let me tell you.
So I'm going to ask you that question later. But I understand that you started wearing the hijab when you were in film school.
Yeah.
So tell me about that. Why did you decide to do that?
Oh, such a good question. Okay, so a couple of reasons. I've had people in my family that wear the hijab. My mom has always worn it. My sister has always worn it. And it's so embarrassing to admit, but I've always wanted to be an actress. And growing up, I thought if I ever wore the hijab, then I could never be an actress. And then I ended up getting into film school, and I noticed that, well, I was like one of the 10 out of 90 people of color there. So there was that. And I very much wanted to wear my faith on my sleeve, or rather on my head. And I wanted to make a statement that, yes, I'm Muslim, I'm here, I'm taking up space, and I'm being creative, and I belong here, and I deserve a space here. And I know...
Because I'm thinking that if you removed your hijab, you might be, any culture or any ethnicity, right?
Yeah, and it would have been easier, but I knew that in my heart that I wasn't like everybody else. And I did have these morals and belief systems that was really important to me, and I didn't want to get rid of it. And so I knew that if I wore the hijab and somebody else who wore the hijab as well saw that, they would also be more encouraged to kind of, or be brave enough to kind of walk into these spaces and be like, no, we deserve to be here as well. So that was one of the reasons. Like, one of them was very much based on my own identity. And then another reason was for more spiritual reasons, of course. So, one of the most important aspects of Islam is complete reliance on God. And one of the ways that I practice that, along with God consciousness, is when I walk into spaces that I love, acting spaces, I am immediately aware that I'm the only one in the hijab. So there comes in my God consciousness. And my reliance on God is, I might never get a role as an actress. Maybe. I had that genuine thought. I was like, I might never get a role ever again, but if I have God, I have everything. So I made that decision for myself that you're never at a loss if you're practicing your faith. And so putting on the hijab while wanting to act, like, it seemed so impossible. And there's no other situation where like I would have ultimate reliance but then. And I did that, and then 2 years later I got an agent. So I mean, I very much believe in God because of that.
So how have people responded to you wearing a hijab?
Oh, good question. I guess if it's my family, they're excited. I guess maybe my parents are always like, oh, she wants to be an artist, but then they see me wearing the hijab and doing it, and they're like, no, like, she's someone who stays true to her faith and is still doing this. I guess
I'm thinking about the film industry, your film school, your instructors, maybe casting directors, that sort of thing.
I mean, it's so interesting. I think people want diversity, but it seems like it's on such a surface level. Like, it almost feels very politically correct, like, oh, that's fine, it's not a problem. And then you walk into a space and they're like, so how is this gonna work? Like, can you take it on? And it's like...
So do they ask you those questions?
Yeah, actually. I've had a really uncomfortable situation where I was actually in 3 acting classes with the same woman, and 2 out of the 3 classes she asked me if I could take off my hijab. Now the first time, first of all, she didn't even need to ask the first time because it was like a rehearsal class, and so like there's no performance, there's nobody that I need to show it to, but she was like, oh, do you want to take it off? And in the scene, I was supposed to be wearing a towel on my head, so there was no need for it. But the second time around, it was really offensive where she was like, I know anyone can play anything, and that's the thing right now, but I don't imagine this character to be religious, so could you, you know, like, and I very much don't like when people do this instead of just saying hijab or scarf, and so she was, you know, doing her big hand dance. Or my second biggest pet peeve is when people don't say hijab properly, they say like hijab, and I'm like, you're just making it overly ethnic to like try to be on my side, and you're not. But anyway, so she did that, and that was really offensive. I like totally reported her. But I've had people or instructors rather ask like, oh, can you take it off? But if it's once, fine. Like, you need to ask, but yeah, the time I got it twice was just inappropriate at that point. Yeah.
So how difficult is it to be in hijab, headscarf, and then going to auditions?
It's not, and that's the thing, right? Like when you walk into an acting class, I think people believe that acting is about your best impression of, and that's not what acting is. When you go to an acting class, it's, you know, how true can you be to your emotions in that moment with cameras on and lights on your face, right? And with your nerves pulsing. Like, can you be authentic and true to the emotions and kind of have that recall? And so I've never been in a situation where I was like, oh, I need to take off my hijab, right? Because I've just needed to act like a human, and I'm a human, and I could do that. So being in acting classes, I've never really, aside from questions, I've never in the actual act of acting found it difficult. Auditions itself, like when I'm in a commercial audition, I know they want the hijab. So again, very easy. I'm like, I'm here. I'm what you want. Or if it's like a TV series audition, again, I'm not, it's never like gotten in the way kind of thing.
Are there certain things that you wouldn't be able to do as a Muslim and as someone who wears hijab?
Yeah, I mean, there's like obvious things.
What are the obvious things?
I mean, that's a good question, actually. What are the obvious things? I mean, when people see the hijab, they're like, well, she's not gonna, you know, touch someone of the opposite gender or sex. She's not gonna maybe like take off her clothes. If you're not taking off your hijab, you're not taking off your clothes, and so on and so forth. So there's that kind of obvious. But in my thesis film, I'm having a conversation with two other Muslim actresses, and we're having this conversation about limitations, but like in a nuanced sense. So things like when you wear a hijab, is it appropriate to play a role where you're swearing, or is it appropriate to do a role in combat where you're fighting someone? You know, to what degree do you feel comfortable with a certain type of touch, right? It might not be an embrace, but like a handhold. Like, how do you feel comfortable with that? Or even cheating the shot, right? And I think that's where it gets more personalized per Muslim woman. Some people are okay with cheating, like a kissing shot where it's like the back of the head. I personally don't. Just why we shouldn't have that. But for example, if I have to do combat and if I have to like punch someone in the face, that's contact, physical contact.
But some Muslim women would be comfortable with it. Is that what you're saying? Like some Muslim actors might be comfortable with certain things and some might not.
And and I think that's the kind of misconception that all of our limitations are the same. Sure, like, yes, I think across the board, when it comes to taking off hijab or clothing or very intimate type of touch, no. But I think that there's other kind of, like when you look at me, you think, or maybe you might not feel that way, but non-Muslims might look at me and think devout. And that's like very like solemn and not doing anything. And it's like, well, maybe I am boring and just sad and miserable and oppressed. But like I do consider myself like a devout Muslim, but I will punch someone in the face if I have to do that for a role. So, I mean, I think that's where like the nuance lies.
Would you consider wearing, let's say, like a full body costume, including the face and head?
Do you mean like if it's like a tight, like...
Maybe, yeah. I don't really have anything in mind.
Yeah, you know, like that was another question I asked.
Like an alien costume, for example, where your head is completely covered.
Yeah, you know, I was saying that I personally would feel totally comfortable if I had to do a scene where you had to put like a prosthetic, like tentacles out of my head because my hair is not showing. And I feel comfortable in like hoodies or hats and stuff like that, as long as it's not skin tight. Yeah, which is really interesting. And I mean, this is a totally separate conversation, but the way that we look at aliens, we always think of them as like humans, like naked humans, but like they're aliens. We've never seen them. So what if an alien wears clothes? Like, why don't we explore that? What does that look like? And that opens up the opportunity for people who don't feel comfortable in like nudity or skin tight clothes to play these kind of characters while still being modest. Yeah.
Why do you think there aren't more Muslim actors in all these diverse roles that you're describing?
Well, I mean, I think there's several aspects to it. I think there's the perception, or rather, There is the acting side. Like, I think a lot of Muslims feel like I can't do that because I'm going to go into a space and they're going to make me do something I don't want to do. So let me just not even try, which is kind of problematic because I think the most important thing that you can do is show up as you are and be like, no, like, I'm not going to do that. And the more of us there are, the more that they'll have to accommodate, as opposed to just one person and I'm just an anomaly. So I think that's the biggest, I think that's one of the issues. And then alternatively, I think, you know, casting directors will probably pull from what's written in the script. So I think writers have to be specific, like, yes, I want the secretary to be Muslim, or so on and so forth. And then also casting directors just need to open up their eyes and be like, oh, this might be an interesting kind of role to be another diverse kind of character.
Do you see anything changing in the film industry?
I definitely do.
You do? Okay.
More so with other kind of groups and communities. I definitely see a sudden change, and it's good, and I'm happy, and I love it, and I love watching Netflix and seeing all the diversity, and I'm like pro that. But yeah, in terms of Muslims, it's slow. I think right now, it's kind of hard well, I mean, we're not there in the talent pool to choose from, so you kind of have to find someone ethnic and then put them on, and then hopefully they know how to wear a hijab, or so on and so forth. So that gets a little difficult, but I don't deny that we're just going to start seeing more and more. Like, I don't think people are going to be silent at this point about not seeing themselves represented, especially because we participate in, you know, civic society, that eventually we're going to be like, we want to participate in the representation of kind of seeing ourselves on screen. Yeah.
So some casting call roles call for, you know, they indicate open ethnicity.
Yeah.
Does that provide more of an opportunity for you?
You know, yes and no.
Okay.
It was another important question that I asked in my thesis film. And sometimes the problem with open ethnicity is that even white people will go for open ethnicity.
Okay.
And so they're going to choose the best possible actor. And so they're obviously going to still choose the best out of the group. So you might have a diverse range to choose from, but at the end of the day, they want to pick who can do the job. And so it's really important to have them specifically say, like, okay, fine, like Middle Eastern or Indian, and then she'll wear a hijab kind of thing. That way it kind of narrows the pool to give us more of an opportunity, as opposed to us kind of scrambling to keep up with the people that have just been more trained because they've gotten the opportunities to.
Do you think there are other groups who face similar challenges to Muslims, and I guess Muslim hijabis? Do you think so? Like indigenous groups, for example? Or maybe devout Jews?
Yeah, I mean, in that case, yeah, I think, again, going back to my point of, I do think people want diversity, but they want easy diversity. So they want to write the roles that they're already writing and just have people of color kind of in them, right? And so the problem is when you wear a hijab, or if you are, you know, for example, like a devout Christian or Jew, or, you know, you have, your identity is based in what you practice. So inherently, there might be something in the role that you might not be able to do, and so that's not easy, right? And that kind of rubs people the wrong way. And so I think that's what makes it difficult. So any group of individuals or communities that kind of have to have the script in some way changed. I mean, often you really don't need to, but if they do, yeah, it feels like people don't want to put in the effort, so it gets a little difficult. Yeah.
You know, there are Muslims all over the world who are actors.
Yeah.
So there are Muslims in like Turkey and Pakistan and many different countries.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they manage the same sorts of challenges, or some, you know, something similar to what you do.
That's a good question, and I wonder that myself, to be honest, because it's funny. I don't think, like, if you went to like Malaysia and you walked into an acting school and there was like all these women in hijabs, like, you wouldn't just say like, sorry, none of you guys can be actresses, right? Because the roles that are there in those specific countries, there's no need to explain like why you're wearing a hijab, what is Islam, because everybody already knows. And so the challenge in North America, and what we see a lot of, is like narratives where we are explaining ourselves, like the everyday life of Muslims here, everyday life of this, everyday this, as opposed to, you know, here I am in Tomb Raider, but I wear a hijab or a turban kind of thing. And so I think the difficulty here is that when it comes to talking about acting, we talk about it in North America. The way that we talk about acting is always like, you should be able to play anyone and everything in every ethnicity. And it's like, I'm sorry, in 2019 going forward, there should be no excuse in multicultural countries not to be able to find actors that can actually just play their own ethnicity. Because if you have somebody else playing it, it's just a caricature at this point, and then it can kind of delve into kind of stereotypes. So we really need to reframe how we define what an actor is, and you know, what kind of roles a person should be able to play.
So you're not comfortable with somebody who's white playing, you know, wearing a hijab?
You know, I especially am not, and I say that because we also have to look historically within the context of whiteness or Europeans per se playing characters that should be given to us, because historically, you know, Europeans with Orientalism, they went to the East and they started depicting us as, you know, oppressed or savage and this and that. And so, like, I'm just like, can we have our roles back? Can we have that kind of chance to be able to speak for ourselves? Because you've been doing it and you've been depicting us. And I know the complication is, like, white people can be Muslims. They can convert. Of
course, yeah.
Right? But this is a conversation about positionality. And you know, when it comes to me saying, I just want this, like, I just want to be able to play myself, I think sometimes, you know, often white people get threatened by that. And to that I say, out of the million roles, that's one less role for you to play. Whereas for me, out of all the roles, that might be the only chance I get. So, like, let's not be so selfish and just, like, give me the chance to play the role. And it's such a, like, it's just not true that we're taking their roles away. It's just not true. You know, white people have the chance to be working actors. Like, that's a concept, to be a working actor. That means there's enough roles that you can make a living off of that. And it's just, I think about myself, I'm like, when am I going to become a working actress? Like, when am I going to have the chance to do that? So
we've talked about how there are so many, there aren't that many Muslim actors.
Yeah.
So how do we get Muslim actors? How do you become an actor, first
How
of
do you
all,
become an
right?
actor?
And how do you get Muslims to consider that as a field? Because as we've mentioned, the talent pool is really small, right? So how do we increase that?
Yeah. So it's funny because when I was younger, I was like, oh, I want to be an actress. What do? I go to theater school and I learn how to act there. And then I went to the audition and I was like, oh my God, everybody already knows how to act here. So it's maybe not the space to go. And I mean, again, it's about having the conversation with people who are already in the industry. And if you are in it, let's just say you're a Muslim woman, but you don't wear a hijab, but you are an actress and you do this, like, go out and talk to other Muslims and tell them, like, you go to acting schools. Here are some really great acting schools that you can go to, because you pay to have them teach you how to do it. And let's just say they don't want to cast you. Eventually, enough Muslims are going to step up as directors and writers, and they're going to want to cast you, right? So, how do you become an actor? I would always say start off with training. It's so important. I think people just want to jump and go and be on screen right away. And I think the most important thing is to really learn the craft of it. It's like a sport, right? It's a very physical thing that you need to train and learn how to do. So there are really great acting schools that you can kind of go to. And then eventually you can kind of reach out to an agent or like just see around where there are roles that you can kind of play, or even do something yourself, you know, with your friends.
I wish you all the best, Nawal, in your acting career. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. No, thank you for having me.
We're going to take a break, but we'll be back shortly.